Most men think the problem is they don't know what to say. They rehearse lines, they memorize questions, they study conversation like it's a subject you can pass with enough preparation. But that's not the problem, is they're not actually listening. And because they're not listening, they have nothing real to work with. Active listening sounds almost too simple to take seriously. But strip away the jargon, and what you're left with is this. Most people in conversation are just waiting for their turn to speak. They're not absorbing what's in front of them. They're managing their own anxiety, their own image, their own next move. And the other person feels that absence. She feels it even if she can't name it. Listening deeply, actually listening, is one of the most disarming things you can do. Not because it's polite, because it's rare. When someone genuinely tunes into what you're saying, you feel it. There's a different quality to the attention, and in a world where everyone is half present, that quality hits different. It creates pull. There's a paradox buried in this that most men miss entirely. We think that saying the right thing is what makes us interesting. But the conversations that stick, the ones people replay in their heads on the drive home, those weren't built on clever remarks. They were built on the feeling of being truly heard. The more you listen, the more the other person reveals. The more they reveal, the more you actually have to respond to. You don't run out of things to say because you're not manufacturing content out of thin air. You're responding to something real. Socrates understood this. His whole method wasn't about having answers. It was about asking questions that forced people to confront the gaps in their own thinking. He listened to what people said, and more importantly, to what they didn't say, to where their logic cracked, to where the contradiction lived. That's not passive. That's a form of total engagement. He held the shape of the conversation not by dominating it, but by listening with enough precision to know exactly where to push. Nietzsche said that listening to someone is one of the greatest things you can do for them. Coming from Nietzsche, a man obsessed with power, will, and individual strength, that's not a throwaway line. He understood that listening isn't surrender. It's a form of control. When you listen attentively, you shape the conversation without the other person fully realizing it. You decide what to follow up on. You decide what to let go. You're not reacting. You're directing, quietly, from a place of genuine presence. And this matters enormously in the context of talking to a woman. Men get in their heads. They feel the pressure to perform, to be sharp, to be funny, to fill every silence before it gets uncomfortable. That pressure is exactly what kills the conversation. It makes you mechanical. She can feel the performance happening, and performance creates distance. But when you genuinely listen, when you let her speak without rushing to respond, without mentally drafting your next line while she's still mid-sentence, that creates something different. It creates the feeling that she matters. And that feeling, that specific feeling, is more attractive than any line you could have rehearsed. What listening does, beneath all of this, is give you material. Real material. Not the generic "so what do you do" kind of material. The kind that leads somewhere actually interesting. She'll say something offhand, something small, and if you're paying attention, you'll catch it. The contradiction, the hesitation, the things she almost said but didn't. That's where the conversation lives. That's where you go. And suddenly you're not running out of things to say because you're not trying to generate conversation from nothing. You're excavating it from what's already there. There's also something that happens to you when you genuinely listen to someone. It's almost strange. You start to see parts of yourself through the reflection of what they're saying. You put your own noise down for a moment, your ego, your agenda, your need to be seen, and you just receive. And in that receiving, something opens up. The conversation stops being a performance you're giving and starts being a place you're both in. That shift is everything. Now, the other side of this, the engine that keeps a conversation alive, is curiosity. Not performed curiosity, not strategic curiosity, but the real thing. The kind that makes you forget you were ever trying to be impressive in the first place. Most men approach conversation as a transaction. They're trying to deposit the right impressions, trying to withdraw approval, and it's exhausting, for them and for her. The alternative isn't being passive or disinterested. The alternative is being genuinely curious. It changes everything about the dynamic. When Aristotle talked about the pursuit of knowledge, he wasn't describing an academic exercise. He was describing a fundamental human drive, this need to understand, to get underneath the surface of things. That drive is what makes a conversation magnetic. Not wit, not confidence in the conventional sense, curiosity. Because when you're truly curious about someone, they feel it, and feeling it, they open. Socrates put it plainly, the only real wisdom is knowing how little you actually know. And while that sounds like humility, what it actually is in practice is permission. Permission to ask, permission to not have the answers. Permission to be genuinely interested in someone else's world without needing to immediately demonstrate that yours is equally interesting. That permission is freedom. And in conversation, freedom is magnetic. Here's where most men get it wrong. They meet a woman and immediately go to demonstration mode. They want to show her they're interesting, well-traveled, intelligent, successful, whatever it is. And in doing that, they completely skip over her. They're not curious about her. They're just using the conversation as a backdrop for their own presentation. She notices. She always notices. Reverse it. Come in with a real question, not what do you do? Something that actually opens a door. What's the most interesting idea you've come across recently? Watch what happens. She's not expecting it. Most people aren't asked questions like that. And when someone is asked something that requires actual reflection, something in them wakes up. She'll either engage with real energy or she'll deflect, and even the deflection tells you something. The beauty of genuine curiosity is that it's self-sustaining. You ask something real, she gives you something real, and that something contains 3 more things worth asking about. You don't manufacture the conversation, it generates itself. The pressure disappears because you're not performing anymore. You're exploring together. And there's an intimacy to that, even early on, even with someone you barely know. The deeper your questions, the more the conversation reveals. Ask someone about their dream, not in a cheesy way, but with actual interest. And what comes back isn't just information, it's a window. You see what she values, what she fears, what she's running toward, and what she's quietly avoiding. You learn more in 5 minutes of real curiosity than you would in an hour of transactional small talk. And here's the thing about questions that most people don't fully appreciate. A good question doesn't demand an answer. It opens a space. It says, come in here, there's something worth exploring. That space is where the connection happens. Not in the answer she gives you, but in the moment of her actually thinking about it. When she pauses, when she looks slightly to the side, when she says, I've never really thought about it that way. That moment, that's it. Stop trying to craft the perfect response. Start trying to craft the perfect question. The response will come naturally because it'll be grounded in something real. But the question, that's where the real skill lives. Then there are stories. And this is where things get interesting, because storytelling is both more powerful and more misunderstood than almost anything else in conversation. We live in an age drowning in information, facts, stats, opinions, all of it available instantly, all of it forgettable within the hour. But a story, a real one, that stays. Aristotle knew this. He understood that the power of narrative lies in pathos, the emotional resonance that makes an audience feel something real. Information passes through us. Stories settle in. But what makes a story actually land is not the plot. It's the truth in it. Not factual truth necessarily, but emotional truth. The recognition a listener feels when a story reflects something they've lived or feared or wanted. Great stories are mirrors. They don't just show you the storyteller, they show you yourself. When you're talking to a woman and you share a real story, not a rehearsed highlight reel, but something with texture and honesty, you give her something to hold on to. An experience from your past where you failed, or got lost, or made a choice you still question. Something with a real emotional core. Not because vulnerability is trendy, but because it's the only thing that actually connects. Confidence gets attention. Authenticity creates connection. Those are not the same thing. The paradox here is counterintuitive. The more vulnerable you are through a story, the more attractive you become. Men often believe the opposite, that showing difficulty or doubt makes you look weak. But watch what actually happens when you tell a story from a genuine, undefended place. Something in the room shifts. She leans in, not because weakness is attractive, but because authenticity is. Because it's rare. Because it signals that you're not running a program, that you're actually present, that you have enough self-possession to not need the protection of a perfect image. Plato understood this too. His dialogues weren't dry philosophical arguments. They were stories. They had characters, tension, stakes, and his most famous one, the allegory of the cave, doesn't work because of the philosophy inside it. It works because of the image, the prisoners, the firelight, the man who turns around. You remember it because it's a story, not because it's an argument. Structure matters in storytelling, even when it feels invisible. You need a beginning that drops the listener somewhere real, a middle where something is actually at stake, and an end that earns its resolution. Not with a neat lesson, but with something honest about what the experience meant. The error most people make is skipping the middle. They jump from setup to punchline and wonder why it doesn't land. The tension is the story. Let it breathe. Details are where stories come alive. Not description for its own sake, but the specific sensory detail that makes an abstract experience suddenly concrete. The smell of the place, what someone said that you still remember word for word. The moment the decision was made. These details are what separate a story someone hears from a story someone experiences. And as you tell it, keep her in mind. Not in a pandering way, but in the way a good writer keeps the reader in mind. Aware of what the story is doing to them, what it's inviting them to feel, where it's creating space for their own experience to surface. The best stories don't just connect the listener to the storyteller, they connect the listener to themselves. That's when the conversation stops being an exchange and starts being a shared territory. The more authentic the stories you share, the more she'll want to share hers. That's the cycle. And once that cycle begins, you're never running out of things to say. Because you're not manufacturing content anymore. You're inside a real exchange, and real exchanges don't run dry. Vulnerability is the part most men skip. And it's the part that matters most. We live inside a culture that's obsessed with the perfected surface, the curated life, the edited image, the version of yourself that's been through several rounds of quality control before anyone sees it. And on some level, everyone is playing that game, which is exactly why stepping out of it is so powerful. True vulnerability isn't emotional dumping. It's not oversharing with someone you met 20 minutes ago. It's something more precise. The willingness to let something real show through, without apology, without immediately managing how it lands. It's the difference between telling someone what happened and actually letting them see what it meant to you. Nietzsche's line about needing a why to survive anyhow gets at something most people miss about strength. He wasn't celebrating weakness. He was saying that the people who are willing to confront their own depths, their flaws, their fears, their contradictions, are the ones who actually have power. Not the ones performing in vulnerability, the ones who've looked at themselves honestly and haven't flinched. That kind of person is magnetic. You can feel the solidity in them. The common misread is that vulnerability means insecurity. It doesn't. Vulnerability paired with self-assurance is one of the most striking combinations a person can have. It says, I know who I am, I'm not threatened by the parts of me that are unfinished, and I'm not going to pretend they don't exist just to make a better impression. That combination, open and grounded, creates trust almost immediately, and trust is the foundation of everything else. Cleopatra understood power, and she understood this. Her hold over Caesar and Antony wasn't only political or aesthetic, it was relational. She formed real bonds through presence, through emotional intelligence, through the ability to be genuine in a world of constant performance. Shared vulnerability was part of that. It always has been. Perfection creates distance. Flaws create connection. This isn't a therapeutic sentiment, it's just observationally true. When someone is too smooth, too polished, too consistently impressive, something in you pulls back. You can't find the edges. There's nowhere to actually land. But when someone lets you see a real seam, a failure they learned from, a fear they still carry, a moment they're not proud of, you feel the ground beneath them. And that's where you can actually stand together. The line between vulnerability and oversharing is context. Early in a conversation, you don't lay everything down. You offer something small and real, and you see how it lands. You're not asking for anything back. You're just letting the door open slightly. If she's the right kind of person, she'll open hers too. That exchange, two people slowly dropping their respective armors, is what intimacy actually feels like in its early stages. It's not dramatic, it's quiet, it's just two people being real with each other, which turns out to be rarer than it should be. When you combine vulnerability with storytelling, something powerful happens. You share a story that has some real weight to it, not performed heaviness but actual experience. And what she receives isn't just information about you, she receives you. The texture of how you think, how you process difficulty, what you value, how you've grown or failed to grow. And that image is infinitely more compelling than any highlight reel. In a romantic context specifically, emotional honesty is the accelerant. When you're willing to say what you actually feel, not recklessly, not without awareness of timing, but genuinely, you create conditions where she can do the same. That mutual permission is where real attraction lives. Not the surface kind. The kind that builds. And then there's humor, which is its own kind of intelligence. The best humor isn't planned. That's the first thing to understand. You can't schedule funny. What you can do is be present enough, relaxed enough, and comfortable enough with yourself that the funny just surfaces. That's the real skill. Not joke telling. Just being in the conversation with enough ease that you catch the absurdity when it walks by. Aristotle placed wit among the virtues. Not as entertainment, but as a form of social intelligence. Too much humor and you come off as someone who can't be serious. Too little and you're exhausting to be around. The balance isn't about quantity, it's about quality of attention. Noticing what's genuinely funny in the moment and being willing to say it out loud without over-explaining it. Humor disarms. That's its most useful social function. When a conversation gets heavy or awkward or over-earnest, a single well-timed line can reset everything. Not to avoid what was being discussed, but to give both of you a moment to breathe inside it. To signal that seriousness doesn't have to mean tension, that you can hold weight without being crushed by it. Self-deprecation, when it's genuine, is particularly powerful. Not performed humility. The kind where you point out a flaw expecting to be contradicted, but actual lightness about your own limitations. When you can laugh at yourself, you communicate that you don't need her to think you're perfect. That's freeing. For her and for the conversation. She can stop trying to be perfect too. Socrates used irony constantly. Not to mock, but to probe. His humor wasn't decoration, it was method. By making the conversation enjoyable, he made people lower their defenses enough to actually think. A laugh can do what a direct challenge can't. It opens the mind sideways, through the back door. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is the funny thing. The trap is trying to be funny. The moment you're performing comedy instead of having a conversation, she feels the shift. The pressure comes through. Humor should be a byproduct of presence, not an objective you're chasing. When you chase it, it evaporates. When you stop trying and just stay in the moment, it shows up on its own. Ultimately, humor isn't really about laughter. It's about the quality of the space between two people. When you're both relaxed enough to play, to be a little absurd, to not take every exchange so seriously. That space becomes inviting. It becomes a place where both of you can actually be yourselves. And that being genuinely, comfortably yourself with another person is what all of this is really pointing toward. Not a technique, not a system, just presence, just attention, just the willingness to actually show up for the conversation in front of you. That's what never running out of things to say actually means.